Helen Whitmore had never thought of herself as wealthy. She had lived most of her life on a teacher's salary, the kind that required patience rather than ambition. For 42 years, she taught English literature at a public high school on Long Island, waking before dawn, grading papers at the kitchen table, and learning how to stretch modest means into something resembling security. When she retired in her late 60s, she did not imagine she would suddenly be living in one of the most coveted summer destinations in America. The Hamptons cottage came to her quietly. It had belonged to her great-aunt Eleanor, a woman Helen remembered only vaguely from childhood summers, linen dresses, sharp wit, and a habit of saving the best stories for after dinner. The cottage sat a few blocks from the water, modest by Hampton standards, but charming in a way that could not be replicated. Cedar shingles weathered to silver. A narrow porch shaded by climbing roses. Inside, low ceilings, uneven floorboards, and the kind of warmth only time could create. Helen moved in after her husband died, bringing with her boxes of books, framed photographs, and the weight of a life lived responsibly. She never considered selling it. To her, the cottage wasn't an asset. It was a continuation. She filled it carefully, deliberately, with the things her family had passed down through generations. Mahogany sideboards polished until they reflected candlelight. A Louis XVI writing desk her grandmother had sworn once belonged to someone important, though no one could ever remember exactly who. Jewelry wrapped in soft cloth, cameos, pearls, a diamond brooch shaped like a forget-me-not. Objects heavy with history and meaning. She kept them not for herself, but for her daughter. Claire. Claire Whitmore lived in Manhattan the way some people lived in dreams. Her apartment overlooked the Hudson. Her closets were curated rather than full. Her friends spoke casually about private drivers and seasonal wardrobes. Claire had never lacked for confidence, and she wore it as naturally as silk. Helen loved her daughter fiercely, though the distance between them had grown wider with each passing year. Claire visited the cottage occasionally, usually with a friend in tow, usually distracted. She'd walk through the rooms with appraising eyes, touching antiques with careless hands. "You should insure all this," she'd say. "You know what this stuff is worth?" Helen would smile. "It's not going anywhere." Claire would sigh, already half on her phone. "You could be living so much better if you just unlocked some of this value." Helen never argued. She had learned long ago that defending your choices to someone who measured life in numbers was a losing game. The money requests came gradually at first. A short-term loan to bridge a slow month. Help with a membership renewal. A favor, really, because it's easier for you than for me. Helen complied without protest. She had savings. She had time. And she believed, perhaps foolishly, that giving was a form of love. The tone changed the year Claire turned 45. The requests became expectations. "Can you transfer it today?" Claire would ask, impatient. "I'm standing at the register." Once, Helen hesitated. "Maybe next week. I just paid the property tax." Claire laughed. "Mom, please. You're sitting on a gold mine." The phrase lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable. The breaking point arrived quietly, disguised as a shopping spree. Helen discovered it not through confrontation, but through routine. She checked her bank account every month the way she always had, careful and methodical. One afternoon, she logged in and stared at the screen longer than necessary. Her checking account was nearly empty. She called the bank, thinking there must be some mistake. There was a series of authorized transfers, the representative said politely. "From your account to your daughter's." Helen thanked her and hung up. An hour later, Claire posted a photo online. A designer handbag, structured and unmistakably expensive, resting on a marble cafe table. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need a little retail therapy." Helen did not comment. That evening, Claire called. "Did you see my text?" she asked, breezy. "I saw the transfer," Helen replied. A pause. Then irritation. "I told you I needed it. It was just easier to do it all at once." Helen sat at the small kitchen table, the antique clock ticking softly behind her. I didn't agree to that amount, she said. Claire exhaled sharply. Mom, you're being dramatic. It's not like you need it. I do need it, Helen said. It's my living money. Claire laughed, a sound that carried no warmth. You're living in a museum. Be honest, how long do you think you can keep that up? There it was. The thing Claire had been circling for years. You should really think about downsizing, Claire continued. Assisted living might be smart. Safe. You'd be closer to people your age. Helen felt something settle inside her then, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. I'm not ready for that, she said calmly. Well, you're not getting any younger, Claire replied. And it would free up resources. After the call ended, Helen stood and walked through the cottage slowly. She touched the furniture with intention this time. Not sentimentally. Assessing. The way she used to read student essays, noticing patterns, understanding structure, recognizing value. She had been a teacher her entire life. She knew when a lesson needed to be taught. The next morning, Helen called Sotheby's. Her voice was steady as she spoke to the specialist. She described the pieces carefully, accurately, without embellishment. When the expert arrived to evaluate the collection, his eyebrows rose more than once. These are exceptional, he said. And very well preserved. Helen nodded. They've been waiting. The auction took place in the spring. Helen did not attend in person. She watched from her cottage, tea cooling beside her, as numbers climbed higher than she had ever imagined. When the final tally came in, she stared at the screen, stunned into stillness. 7 figures. The money landed in her account 2 days later. Helen Whitmore did not call her daughter. She went grocery shopping instead. Helen did not tell anyone about the auction at first. She let the money sit, untouched, like a fact that needed time to settle into truth. For a week, she went about her routines as if nothing had changed. Morning walks down to the water before the beach filled with summer renters. Coffee on the porch. The local paper folded neatly beside her plate. She answered emails from former students who still wrote to her years later, asking for reading recommendations or simply to say hello. It was only when Claire called again that Helen felt the shift fully take shape. Mom, I need another transfer, Claire said without preamble. The rent's due, Anne. No, Helen replied. The word surprised them both. There was silence on the line, followed by a short, incredulous laugh. What do you mean, no? I mean no, Helen said evenly. I'm not sending money. You can't just decide that, Claire snapped. We have an arrangement. Helen leaned back in her chair, looking out at the hydrangeas just beginning to bloom. We never had an arrangement. We had me helping. And I'm done. Claire's tone sharpened. Are you punishing me because of one bag? This isn't about the bag, Helen said. It's about respect. Claire scoffed. Respect? You live in a house full of things you don't even use. You're hoarding wealth while I'm trying to maintain a life. Helen smiled faintly at the word maintain. I taught children who grew up in shelters, she said. You are not struggling. Claire exhaled hard. Fine. Then let's talk logistics. I'm coming out this summer. We'll figure it out in person. Helen did not argue. You're welcome to visit, she said. Just let me know when. The call ended abruptly. Helen sat for a long time afterward, listening to the quiet. She felt lighter than she had in years, and the sensation unsettled her. She had expected guilt, perhaps fear. Instead, there was relief. The following weeks became a careful undoing of old habits. Helen met with a financial advisor recommended by Sotheby's, a woman in her early 50s who spoke plainly and asked thoughtful questions. They discussed longevity, liquidity, intention. What do you want your money to do for you? The advisor asked. Helen considered it. I want it to give me freedom, she said. Not obligation. They structured the accounts accordingly. Then Helen turned to the cottage itself. She had always lived simply, out of habit rather than necessity. Now she allowed herself to imagine comfort not as extravagance, but as pleasure. She hired a local designer, not for status, but for function. The cottage remained modest from the outside, but inside it softened. The antique furniture was gone now, replaced with clean-lined pieces that invited use rather than reverence. The old rug that had required careful stepping was swapped for something plush beneath bare feet. The walls, once crowded with inherited art, were repainted in warm, coastal neutrals. Helen kept a few personal items. A framed photograph of her parents. Her husband's watch. A single strand of pearls she'd worn to her daughter's graduation. Everything else had served its purpose. The kitchen became her favorite transformation. Helen had cooked all her life, but always frugally, efficiently. Now she stocked it like a professional. Fresh herbs in the window. Copper pans hung within reach. The refrigerator filled with things she'd once considered indulgent. Lobster tails wrapped neatly in butcher paper. Truffles shaved paper-thin over scrambled eggs. Caviar spooned carefully onto blinis while she sat on the deck, the Atlantic air cool against her skin. She did not feel extravagant. She felt awake. She began inviting people over. Not the old neighbors she'd nodded to politely for years, but new acquaintances, retirees who lived year-round, artists, a widow who had moved east after her children settled overseas. They gathered in the evenings, wine glasses clinking, laughter unforced. Helen listened more than she spoke, the way she always had. She learned who had reinvented themselves late in life, who had left marriages, who had finally learned to rest. For the first time in decades, no one asked her for anything. As summer approached, the Hamptons changed character. The roads filled. The grocery store aisles narrowed with impatient bodies. Helicopters thudded overhead like punctuation marks. Claire texted in early June. Coming out July 1st, bringing friends. Hope the house is ready. Helen stared at the message, then typed back. The house will be occupied. Let me know if you want to meet for lunch. Claire did not reply. Helen assumed that meant nothing had registered. She continued living exactly as she pleased. The day Claire arrived, Helen was already on the deck. The table was set with linen napkins and a spread that would have made her old self uncomfortable. A tin of caviar resting in crushed ice. Champagne flutes catching the afternoon sun. Her friends sat around her, people who knew her not as a resource, but as a person. A black SUV pulled into the gravel drive. Claire stepped out first, sunglasses large enough to conceal her expression. Behind her, two women she'd introduced once as from the city, dressed in flowing whites and expectation. Claire stopped short when she saw the cottage. The porch was bare. No antique chairs. No familiar sideboard visible through the window. The place looked different. Lived in. She walked up slowly. Where's everything? Helen rose, calm, smiling. Hello, Claire. Claire removed her sunglasses. Where is the furniture? I sold it. Claire blinked. You what? I sold the heirlooms, Helen said gently. At auction. The words hung between them. You can't be serious, Claire said. Those were mine. They were always mine, Helen replied. I was keeping them for you. I've changed my mind. Claire's face flushed. You had no right. I had every right, Helen said. And I used it. Claire gestured toward the table. So what is this? Some kind of performance? Helen glanced at her guests, then back to her daughter. This is my life, she said. You're welcome to join us if you're here to be kind. One of Claire's friends shifted uncomfortably. Claire laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You sold everything and now you're throwing parties? I sold what was weighing me down, Helen said. And yes. I enjoy having people over. Claire crossed her arms. So what am I supposed to do now? Helen met her gaze steadily. I don't know, she said. But it won't be solved with my money. For a moment, Helen thought Claire might shout. Instead, her daughter's expression hardened into something colder. This isn't over, Claire said. Helen nodded. I know. Claire turned and walked back to the car. Her friends followed, confused and silent. The SUV pulled away, gravel crunching sharply beneath the tires. Helen sat back down. Her friend poured her another glass of champagne without asking. You okay? Someone murmured. Helen tasted the salt in the air, the richness on her tongue, the absence of dread in her chest. I am, she said. And for the first time, she truly was. Claire did not call for several days after she left the cottage. When she finally did, it was not to apologize, nor to explain. It was to demand. You can't just cut me off, she said, her voice tight with controlled outrage. You've put me in an impossible position. Helen was at the kitchen counter, slicing lemons for a tart she planned to bake later. She listened carefully, the way she once listened to students who mistook volume for conviction. I haven't put you in any position, Helen said. You're an adult. You manage your own life. You've embarrassed me, Claire snapped. My friends think you've lost it. Helen smiled faintly. Then perhaps they've learned something about appearances. There was a long silence. When Claire spoke again, her voice was quieter, edged with something unfamiliar. You were supposed to leave this to me, she said. All of it. Helen set the knife down and leaned against the counter. I spent years believing my purpose was to preserve things for you. Furniture. Jewelry. Money. As if love were something you could store and hand over. And now? Claire asked. Now I'm using what I earned, Helen said. I'm not punishing you. I'm choosing myself. Claire hung up without another word. The summer unfolded without drama after that. Helen's days settled into a rhythm that felt intentional rather than inherited. She woke early, but no longer out of habit. She walked to the water and swam slowly, letting the cold steady her thoughts. She cooked meals that required patience, risotto stirred carefully, bread kneaded by hand. In the afternoons, she read novels she had never taught, stories she could enjoy without annotating. People came and went. Some stayed for an evening, others for hours. They talked about art and loss and second chances. No one asked Helen what she had left to give. They asked her what she liked. Word spread, as it always did in small places. The woman in the cedar-shingled cottage hosted remarkable dinners. The retired teacher had impeccable taste. The food was extraordinary, but the atmosphere was better. Helen did not correct anyone. She had stopped explaining herself. In August, she received a letter from Claire. It was handwritten, the script tighter than Helen remembered. I don't know who you are anymore, it began. You've changed the rules without telling me. I feel like you've erased the future I counted on. Helen read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She wrote back the next day. I didn't erase your future, she wrote. I returned responsibility to you. That is what parents are supposed to do, even if we do it late. She did not hear from Claire again that summer. Instead, she heard from herself. She noticed how easily she laughed now, how little she braced herself before phone calls. She noticed the absence of that low-level anxiety that had accompanied every interaction with her daughter for years. It felt strange at first, like silence after constant noise. By September, the crowds thinned. The cottage felt expansive again, not because it was large, but because it was no longer burdened by expectation. One afternoon, Helen hosted a small gathering on the deck. The air was cool. The ocean steady. A tin of caviar rested open, its contents half finished. Someone poured Dom Perignon with the ease of habit rather than ceremony. Helen sat among them, wrapped in a soft sweater, listening to a man describe how he had sold his company at 60 and learned to paint at 62. A woman across from her talked about finally leaving a marriage that had shrunk her. No one spoke of inheritance. As the sun dipped low, Helen caught sight of herself reflected faintly in the glass door. She looked older, yes. But also lighter. More present. She thought of the antiques now scattered across the world, on mantels, in private collections, admired for their beauty rather than guarded for obligation. She thought of the money, working quietly for her comfort rather than disappearing into someone else's appetite. She thought of her daughter, too. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Love, she realized, was not proven by how much you gave until nothing remained. It was proven by knowing when to stop giving in the wrong way. As evening settled, someone raised a glass. To Helen, they said. For knowing exactly who she is. Helen lifted her own glass, the champagne catching the last light. She did not feel triumphant. She felt complete. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the cottage was quiet, Helen stepped out onto the deck alone. The stars were sharp against the dark sky. The sea moved with the patience of something that had seen every version of human drama and outlasted them all. She breathed deeply, savoring the richness of the moment, the food, the friendship, the freedom. For the first time in her life, everything she had was truly hers. And it was more than enough.